There is a kind of cruelty that leaves no bruise. It is not a blow. It is a room full of your own blood, deciding out loud that your face is the most amusing thing they have ever been given. When her grandmother sent her north to the richest man in England, it was meant to be the joke that finished her. She was to be looked at, laughed over, and returned unwanted. Instead, she stood in his cold gallery with her hood pushed back. And he did not look at her face. He looked at her hands. The mail coach set her down at the Hollodyke Turnpike a little after 4, and then it went on without her, and the sound of it faded, and there was nothing but wind coming off the fells and the smell of wet bracken. Damaris Sowerby stood at the roadside, with her portfolio under one arm, and waited for a horror that did not arrive. She had expected to feel it. She had rehearsed it. Instead, she felt only the cold working through the soles of her boots and a distant clerical interest in how far she would have to walk. She was 26. Her gown was brown stuff, serviceable, cut 4 seasons ago for a woman 2 inches shorter, let down at the hem with a band of a slightly different brown that anyone standing close would notice, and nobody stood close. Over it she wore a cloak of gray wool with a deep hood, and the hood was the only part of the whole arrangement that had ever been chosen for her with any care, because a deep hood was useful to everyone. The mark ran from her left temple down across the cheekbone, and stopped just short of her jaw. It had been there since the hour she was born. It was the color of crushed fruit, and in cold weather it darkened, and in candlelight it appeared to move. Her grandmother called it the blemish, when there were servants present, and the blot when they were not. Her younger sisters had been raised on the word, and used it the way other children used a nickname, without malice, which was worse than malice. In her reticule was a letter under the Sowerby seal, addressed to the Marquess of Caldbeck, and Damaris knew exactly what it said because she had written it. That was the part she could not walk off. Her father owed money in 3 counties and could not hold a pen without his hand shaking, and so for 6 years all family correspondence had come out of the small back room, off the still room where Damaris kept her inks. Her grandmother dictated, Damaris copied. It was the one task nobody else wanted and nobody else could do. And on Tuesday last, her grandmother had stood at the window with her hands folded and dictated a letter, offering her eldest granddaughter to a stranger as a specimen. The Marquess of Caldbeck was the richest man in England, and everybody knew what he collected. Marrodine held the better part of a wing of it. Beetles pinned in their thousands, the skeleton of a whale hung from the joists, birds from countries with no proper names, a narwhal tusk longer than a man is tall. He bought whatever was rare. He paid without haggling, and he never explained himself, and he had not been seen in London in 9 years. "Your face," her grandmother had said, "is the only rare thing this family possesses. We may as well see what it fetches." Araminta had laughed into her tea. Sidony, who was 18 and not yet entirely spoiled, had gone red and looked at the carpet and said nothing, which was its own small betrayal and stung more than the laughing. And Sir Hollis Sowerby, baronet, father of all 3, had sat by the fire with a newspaper he was not reading, and let the whole of it happen over the top of the page. Damaris had written the letter out in her best hand. She had written the phrase, "a curiosity of the flesh," and had not permitted her wrist to falter, because if it faltered, she would have to write the page again, and she was not going to give them the second page. Then she had blotted it and sanded it and handed it over to be sealed. The joke was not complicated. She had understood it before the wax was warm. Caldbeck would open the letter, look at what had been sent to his door, and do what men of that kind did, which was to have her removed. By Sunday, it would be at every table between Hexham and Carlisle that the Sowerby girl had been carted north like a pickled lamb, and refused. Araminta was to be presented in the spring. A sister nobody could look at was an obstacle. A sister everybody could laugh at was a small, warm point of interest, and warmth of any sort was hard to come by in a family with no money left. Somewhere past the 3rd change of horses she had worked out that she could simply not deliver it. Get down, walk into a town, take work. She had turned the thought over for 11 miles and put it down again. Her grandmother had paid the fare one way. That had been said aloud, at the door, in front of the footman, with the particular brightness of a woman who wants a thing understood. There was no return fare, and there was no money in Damaris's reticule beyond a shilling and some coppers, and a woman of 26 with a face like hers did not walk into a strange town and take work. She had tried it once at 19 and had learned what she needed to know about it in under a day. So, she picked up the portfolio and started along the track towards Marrowdean, because the only road left to her ran directly through the joke, and the only way out of it was the far side. The portfolio she carried was tied with tape and heavier than it looked. It held 9 years of work. Nobody in her family had ever asked to see inside it. Marrowdean did not announce itself. There were no gates, no lodge, and no avenue of limes planted by somebody's great-grandfather to be admired from a carriage. The track simply narrowed, and the bracken gave way to cropped turf, and then the house was there in the dip of the land like something that had been set down and forgotten. It was long and low and built of a gray stone that had gone nearly black with weather. Half of it was older than the other half by 300 years, and no attempt had ever been made to reconcile them. What struck her, standing at the edge of the turf with the light going, was the glass. Every window on the northern front was enormous, far larger than any sane man would cut into a wall in that county. And every one of them was clean. Somebody kept those windows spotless, in a place where the rain came sideways 5 days in 7. It was the only vanity the house had. The rain began properly when she was 50 yards out. By the time she reached the door, her hood was soaked through and clinging, and the whole left side of her face was uncovered to the weather. There was no help for it. She had one hand on the portfolio and one on her skirts, and no third hand for vanity. The door was opened before she knocked. The man standing in it was somewhere past 60, dressed in black, with the flat, unhurried face of somebody who had spent 40 years being looked at by his betters and had long ago stopped finding it interesting. He looked at her. He looked at the portfolio. He did not look at the mark, and he did not carefully avoid looking at it either, which was a different thing altogether, and one she had encountered perhaps 4 times in her life. "His lordship does not receive," he said. "I have not come to be received. I have come to deliver. Leave it then. There is a box in the wall by the boot scrape. It is emptied at 9. Damaris did not move. The rain ran off the end of her nose and dropped onto the tape of the portfolio, and she shifted it under her cloak, which was the first thing she had done since the turnpike that resembled care for anything. "I am afraid the letter is about me," she said. "If I put it in the box and walk away, his lordship will read a description of a person he has never met and form an opinion of her, and she will not be there to be looked at, which would make the entire journey pointless. And the journey has already cost my grandmother 11 shillings, and I should hate to think of her wasting money." The man's expression did not change by any measurable amount, but something happened behind it. "You are cold," he said. "I am. I am also going to stand here until somebody takes this letter out of my hand, because I have nowhere else to be and no coach until Thursday. You may leave me on the step if you like. I will not shout or weep or make any sort of scene. I shall simply be here in the morning, considerably less decorative than I am now, and you will have to explain me." There was a pause of perhaps 3 seconds. Then he stepped back into the dark of the hall and held the door. "Wipe your feet," he said. "He is in the long gallery, and he does not care to be startled. My name is Praed. Do not touch anything, and if a large white dog comes at you, stand still and let it smell you, because it is deaf and cannot hear you telling it to stop." Damaris stepped inside. Behind her, Praed shut the door on the weather, and she heard the bolt go across, and she thought, with the clarity that came to her sometimes, at the worst moments, that she had just been locked in. The long gallery ran the whole northern length of the house, and it was the coldest room Damaris had ever stood in that had a fire lit in it. The fire was at the far end, and had clearly been built for the sake of the man rather than the room. Because the room was hopeless. The ceiling went up into dark. From the joists above her hung the articulated skeleton of something enormous, ribs curving down out of the shadow like the inside of a ship, and along both walls stood cases of glass, and every case held things that had once been alive and now were arranged, and down the middle of the gallery, at intervals of perhaps 10 feet, stood lamps, not sconces. Lamps, oil and polished reflectors, more than any household in England could justify burning at once on a wet Tuesday. He was at the third case from the end, with his back to the door, a big man who had made no effort about any part of himself. No coat, shirt sleeves rolled to the elbow, dark hair too long, and pushed off his forehead with the side of a wrist because the hands were occupied. He was bent almost double over the open case, and in his fingers was a pair of forceps holding something no larger than a grain of barley. "Pratt," said Miss Sowerby, "my lord," and withdrew, and the door closed, and Damaris was alone with the richest man in England and a great many dead beetles. He did not turn round. "The light is going," he said. "Whoever you are, take the lamp from the stand behind you and bring it here, and hold it where I tell you, and then you may say whatever you have come to say." She had prepared for a good many receptions, for the stare, which was commonest, for the flinch, which was rarer and easier, for the elaborate kindness of a person determined to prove they had not noticed, which was worst of all. She had not prepared for being handed a job. Damaris set the portfolio against the leg of the case, took the lamp, and brought it. He looked at her then. It lasted less than a second. His eyes went across her face the way a man's eyes go across a milestone on a road he has traveled before, registering it, requiring nothing of it, and then they went back down to the forceps. There was no flicker in it. "Closer," he said. "Not above. Beside, if you put it above, you will throw your own shadow across the thing, and I shall pin it through the thorax and ruin it." She moved the lamp beside. "Now do not move." She did not move. She stood with her arm out and the heat of the glass against her wrist, and watched him work, and she saw two things at once. The first was that he was extraordinarily good at it, that he handled the thing with a delicacy entirely at odds with the size of his hands. The second was that he was doing it from 6 inches away, with his head turned very slightly to the left, and that he had wanted the lamp beside rather than above, not for the shadow but for some other reason he had not given her. The card went down, the pin went in, he straightened and breathed out. "Right," he said, "whoever you are." He turned to take the lamp, and because she was cold and had held her arm out for 2 minutes, her hand had begun to shake, and the light shivered on the glass. He reached to steady it, and instead of the lamp he took her wrist, and then he stopped. He turned her hand over. He did it without ceremony, the way a man turns over a horseshoe he has picked up in a field, and brought it close to his face, and looked at it in the light of the lamp she still held. The middle finger of her right hand had a callus on the inside joint the size of a pea, hard and yellowed, built up over 9 years. There was graphite worked so far into the whorls of the fingertips that it no longer washed out. There was a black crescent of ink under the nail of the forefinger, and a flat shine on the ball of the thumb where she stumped her charcoal. He said, "You draw." Damaris Sowerby had been looked at all her life. She had been looked at in church, in shops, on the road, over the tops of fans. She had been looked at more thoroughly and more often than most of the great beauties of the age. Nobody had ever once looked at her hands. She heard herself say, "Yes." He let go. He picked up a cloth he had been using on the forceps, considered it, discarded it, and pulled a pair of gray wool mitts out of his waistcoat pocket instead and put them into her hands. "Put those on." "You are shaking, and I cannot use a shaking hand. Cold ruins the joints, and a ruined hand takes years off a person, and I have no interest in watching it happen in my gallery." Then, still not looking at her face, he said, "Praed does not admit people. So you must have said something to him. What was it?" I told him I would still be on the step in the morning, Damaris said, and considerably less decorative, and that he would have to explain me. Nothing happened for a moment. Then a sound came out of the Marquis of Caldbeck that she could not at first identify. It was short and rough, and seemed to catch on something on the way up, and it was over almost before it began, and he appeared as surprised by it as she was. "Give me the letter," he said. She drew it out and held it out, and he took it, and she watched him break the seal with his thumb and turn towards the lamp. Then she made herself watch his face, because she had decided somewhere around the second change of horses that she was going to watch. If a thing was going to be done to her, she would at least see it done. She had learned that at 14, and it had served her tolerably well ever since he read. The way he had worked close, perhaps 8 inches from the page, head tipped a little to the left, the paper angled to bring the lamplight straight across it, rather than onto it. She knew the letter by heart. She knew where he was on the page by how long he had been quiet. He was at the second paragraph now. That was the one about her mother's confinement and the midwife's account of the birth, which her grandmother had thought lent the thing authenticity. He was at the third. The third was the description. Her hands, inside the borrowed mitts, were perfectly still. He got to the bottom of the first sheet and turned it over, and then he did something she had not accounted for. He went back. His eyes traveled up the page again, to somewhere near the middle, and stopped, and stayed there for what felt like a very long time. Then he folded the letter into 3 and held it against his leg. "Your grandmother," he said, "writes a remarkably clean hand." "My grandmother," Damaris said, "writes nothing at all. She has not held a pen since the year I was born. She dictates. I write." He looked up. Not at her face. At the middle distance somewhere past her shoulder, the way a man does when he is rearranging something inside his head and needs the room to be temporarily unoccupied. "You wrote this?" "You wrote out a description of your own face for a stranger to read." "I wrote out a description of my own face for a stranger to read," said Damaris. "And I did it in my best hand. And I did not blot it, because if I had blotted it, I should have had to do the whole thing again. And I was not going to sit down twice to that particular piece of work." He said nothing. She heard her own voice going on without her permission, flat and level, the way it always went when she was furthest from calm. "A curiosity of the flesh," she said. "That is the phrase. Page 1, line 11. She was pleased with it. She had it from a sermon. There is also a passage about how the color deepens in cold weather, which is accurate, and one about how it is thought by some to resemble a handprint, which is not accurate but is a great deal more interesting, and my grandmother has never in her life let accuracy stand in the way of interest, and at the end, there is a price. I do not know what it is. She would not dictate the figure to me. She wrote that part herself, and it took her a very long time, and her hand shook, and I could hear it. The gallery was quiet. And somewhere in it, a clock was going. So, Damaris said, "Now you have read it. You may have me put out. I would only ask that it be done at the front rather than the back, because there is no point in the whole enterprise unless somebody sees it, and if nobody sees it, my grandmother will simply have to send me somewhere else, and I should very much rather not do this again." Caldbeck turned the folded letter over in his fingers. "Why would somebody need to see it?" "Because I am the joke," Damaris said. "You are only the room it is being told in." That sound came out of him again. Longer this time. He put his hand over his mouth as though to stop it, and did not entirely succeed. And when he took the hand away, his face had changed in a manner that made him look about 10 years younger and considerably worse-tempered. "I have been called many things," he said. "I do not believe I have previously been called a room." Then he stopped. He unfolded the letter again, and found the place he had gone back to before, and read it once more. "There is a postscript," he said. "There is no postscript. There is a postscript. 4 lines. Different hand, heavier pressure, and she has crossed a word out and written over it which she should not have done, because I can read what was underneath." Damaris felt the cold come back into her, and it was not from the room. "What does it say?" Caldbeck folded the letter for the third time and put it into his waistcoat pocket, and this time he did look at her, straight on, for rather longer than a second. "It says, 'He said that you are not to be told.'" He did not explain the postscript, and Damaris discovered, over the following quarter of an hour, that there was no method by which a person could make him. He simply went on to the next thing. He walked down the gallery to the fire, pulled a bell, and when Praed came, he said, "Miss Sowerby will eat." And Praed went away again without asking a single question, which told her a good deal about how the house was run. The food came on a plain tray, and it was not delicate. Cold mutton, bread, a wedge of hard yellow cheese, a jar of pickled damsons, and a pot of tea strong enough to strip varnish. He put it on the top of a case, which she suspected was a thing no proper household would permit, and then he sat down on a low bench, with his back against the glass, and paid her no attention whatsoever. Damaris ate. She had meant to be polite about it for perhaps 2 minutes, and then she stopped bothering, because she had last eaten at 11 o'clock the previous night, and pride was a thing you could afford at a table where you were expected. He let her get all the way through it. He did not watch her do it. He picked up a small brass instrument from beside him and took it apart and put it back together twice. Only when she set the cup down did he speak. "Your father," he said, "Sowerby, Baronet. Debts in Northumberland, Durham, and where else? Cumberland. How much? I do not know exactly. I am not permitted to see the whole of it. I should estimate 11,000. Caldbeck's head came up. "You should estimate." "I copy his correspondence," Damaris said. "I do not see the accounts, but I see what he writes to the men he owes, and I see what they write back, and a man's tone tells you a great deal about how much he is being asked for. There are 4 creditors who write to him as an equal, and 2 who write to him as a debtor, and 1 who has stopped writing altogether and has begun writing to my grandmother instead. That last one is the largest." He was quiet for a moment. "And what does she write back to him?" "I do not know. She does not dictate those." Something moved behind his face and did not come out. He said, "How long have you drawn?" "Since I was 17. "Who taught you?" "Nobody. There was a book of engravings in the house, plates of British insects, and the drawing in it was very bad. I could see it was bad. I could not have told you why, but I could see it, and it made me want to do it correctly, and so I did it until I could. 9 years and no master, and nobody has seen any of it." Damaris said nothing. "You have a portfolio," he said, "standing against the leg of that case which you have carried through the rain and set down where you could keep your eye on it, and you have not once offered to open it. Which is odd, since it is the only argument you have. I am not going to open it." "Why?" "Because you would look at it," said Damaris, "and then you would say something." That landed somewhere. She saw it land. "Very well," he said. "Then we shall do it another way." He got up, went to a drawer at the end of the gallery and came back with a sheet of paper, a board, a stump of graphite, and a candle. And he set them on the bench, and then he opened a case and lifted out a specimen on its card and put it beside the light. "Draw that," he said. "You may have as long as you like. I shall be at the other end." It was a stag beetle, very large, mounted, with its mandibles open. She had never seen one. She sat down on the cold bench with the board on her knees, and she looked at it for a long time before she made a mark, which was the part nobody ever understood, and then she drew it. It took her 50 minutes. She was aware, distantly, of the rain, and of the fire, and of a large white dog that came in at some point, sniffed her hem thoroughly, sighed, and lay down on her feet. When she was finished, she said his name, and he came, and she gave him the board. He took it to the lamp. He brought it up close. He held it there without moving for so long that Damaris began absurdly to be frightened. Then he said, in a voice that had gone strange, You have drawn the left mandible short. I have not. It is short. There is a piece missing from the tip. It has been broken and worn smooth, so it was done while the animal was alive, and some time before it died, because the break is rounded. Caldbeck lowered the board. I have owned that specimen for 6 years, he said. I have looked at it perhaps 1,000 times. I did not know that. He sat down on the bench beside her, which put him closer than any man had sat to her in her adult life, and he did not appear to notice. I am going to make you an offer, he said, and I am going to make it badly, because I have not made one in a long while. There are 9,000 items in this house. Rather more, probably. About 1/3 of them have never been catalogued, and about 1/10 have never been drawn, and the ones that have been drawn were drawn by 2 men I employed and dismissed, one because he was slow and one because he was a liar. And a liar with a pencil is worse than no pencil at all. I want every item in this collection recorded on paper, every one, beginning at the north end of this gallery and going through to the cellars. I will pay you £80 a year and your keep. You will have the north room off the west stair, which has the best light in the house, and you will have whatever materials you ask for. And you will ask for good ones because I am rich and I dislike being asked for cheap things. You will work 6 days. You will not be required at dinner, and you will not be required to be pleasant, and no one will come to look at you, because no one comes here. Damaris sat with the dog on her feet, and her heart going in a way she did not care for. They will say, I am your mistress, she said. They will say worse than that, said Caldbeck. They will say you are in a case. Yes, that had occurred to me. Does it change your answer? She thought about the spring, and Araminta being presented, and the back room where she kept her inks, and 11 miles of turning a thought over on a coach. No, she said. £80 a year is £80 a year more than I have, but I want something else in the bargain. Name it. You will not tell me what is in that postscript. Very well. Then I should like to write the reply. Caldbeck looked at her sideways. Your grandmother is expecting me to send you back. She is expecting you to send me back today, in a hired trap, in the rain, so that it is seen. Which means whatever answer she gets instead will be read aloud at that table, and it will be read in my handwriting, because she will know my hand at 40 paces. So I should like to be the one to write it. I have written every other thing that family has ever said. I should like once to write something it did not. For the first time since she had come into the gallery, the Marquess of Caldbeck smiled properly, and it was not a pleasant smile at all, and Damaris found she liked it enormously. Prayed, he called, without taking his eyes off her. Bring Miss Sowerby a pen. The north room off the west stair had a window that ran nearly from the floor to the ceiling, and Damaris understood, standing in the doorway of it the following morning, why the glass at Marrodine was kept clean. There was a table under the window that had been made for the purpose, tilted, with a lip along the bottom. There was a chair with a straight back. There was a stove, already lit, and on the table, laid out in rows by somebody who had plainly been told to lay them out in rows, were materials of a quality she had only read about. Swan quills, sable brushes in 5 sizes, cakes of watercolor in a mahogany box with a maker's name stamped in the lid, and paper, a great deal of paper, hot-pressed, thick, white as a new tooth. She stood in the doorway for some time before she went in. She had woken at 5:30 out of habit and had lain in the dark waiting to be needed, and nothing had happened. No bell, no voice on the stair, no one wanting a ham let down before breakfast, no one wanting a letter written before the post, no one wanting anything at all. It had taken her the better part of an hour to work out what the feeling was, and when she had it she did not much like it, because a thing you have never had is difficult to hold and easy to drop. Mrs. Kellow, the housekeeper, was a small gray woman who spoke about 4 sentences a day and used 2 of them on Damaris that morning. Breakfast is at 7. Nobody will come in here without knocking, and if they do, you tell me, and I will see to it." Then she went away, and Damaris sat down at the tilted table and began. The work was slower than anyone would have believed who had not done it. For each item she measured, in 3 axes, with a pair of brass dividers. She noted the pin, the card, the hand of whatever label was already attached, the drawer, and the case. Then she drew it twice, once from above and once from the side, and then she wrote the entry, and then she went on to the next thing. She got through 9 items on the first day, and 11 on the second, and by the end of the first week she had a rhythm and was making 20. Nobody came to tell her she was taking too long. Nobody came at all except Mrs. Kello with a tray at noon, and the white dog, whose name turned out to be Tobit, and who established within 3 days that the warm patch beside the stove belonged to him and had probably always belonged to him. Kolbeck did not hover. He came into the gallery at odd hours and worked at the far end and said almost nothing. Twice he asked to see what she had done, and both times he took the sheets to a lamp and held them close and gave them back without comment, and the second time his hand was not quite steady when he did it. On the 9th day he took her off the gallery altogether. There was a man coming up from London in the spring to value the whole collection for insurance, he said, and the birds were the part he could least afford to have wrong, and the beetles could wait. They were in the 3rd room, in a case by themselves, and in the center of that case, on a mount of its own, was the thing the whole house apparently knew about. Praed had mentioned it. Mrs. Kello had mentioned it. It had been bought 4 years earlier from a dealer in Rotterdam for 900 guineas, on the strength of it being the only example of its kind ever brought out of the Eastern Islands, and Kolbeck had been written about in 3 journals on account of owning it. Damaris drew it for 2 days. On the afternoon of the 2nd day she put her pencil down, sat back, and looked at what she had made, and then she got up and went and found him. "I need you to come and look at something," she said. He came. She had the drawing on the board and the bird out of its case on the bench under the best of the lamps, and she did not say anything. At first she let him look. "Well," he said, "count the tail." He counted the tail. "There are 12, he said. "There are 12. Now look at the outer 3 on the left, and the outer 3 on the right. They are the same length to within a hair. They are not the same bird. The barring on one side runs at a different angle to the shaft, and there are 2 more bars in it, and no creature that ever lived grows a tail that disagrees with itself. I did not know that when I began. I only knew it looked wrong to draw. So I drew it very slowly, and then I found this." She turned the bird gently on the mount and showed him the underside of the covert. "There is a seam. It is very fine, and it has been dressed with something waxy and then powdered over, and you would never see it in a case behind glass at 4 feet. The tail is from another bird. So is the crest. The crest is a different white. It is not the white of the breast. It is a colder white. And I mixed both of them this morning to be certain, and they are not the same pigment because they are not the same feather." She put the 2 small swatches of paint down on the bench. "Somebody made this," she said. "It is 3 birds. It is very good work. Whoever did it knew a great deal about birds, and rather more about men who buy them." Kolbeck did not say anything for a long while. Then he sat down heavily on the bench and put both hands over his face and laughed, and it was not the rusty short thing from the first evening. It went on for some time. Tubit came in from the corridor to see what the matter was and stood with his head on one side. 900 guineas, Kolbeck said at last from behind his hands. "Rusbridge." I shook the man's hand. "I wrote to Banks about it. I am sorry." "Do not be sorry. Be exactly as you are and never once be sorry about it." He took his hands down. He picked up the 2 paint swatches and held them at his usual distance, and Damaris watched him do it and said nothing. And something in the room shifted very slightly the way a floor shifts when weight moves upstairs. "How did you see it?" he said. "Because I drew it. That is all drawing is. Everybody thinks it is the hand. It is not the hand. It is that you are made to look at a thing for 4 hours. Instead of 4 seconds, and after the first hour, you stop seeing what you expect and start seeing what is there. Kalbeck was quiet. "Say that again," he said. She said it again. He got up, went to the wall by the door, and took down a ring of small keys that had hung there since before she came, and he put them into her hand and closed her fingers over them. "Every case in the house," he said. "You do not need to ask, and you do not need to wait for me. Anything that is wrong, you take it out and you put it on the bench and you leave a note." Then he stopped in the doorway with his hand on the frame. "One other thing," he said. "I have written to the engraver in Edinburgh this morning. Every plate that comes off that press will carry your name beneath it, in the same size of letter as the Latin, and I have put it in writing so that it cannot be got out of afterwards by anybody, including me." He was almost out of the room when he turned back. "There is one thing I want done, out of order," he said. "In the cellar there is a black chest, unnumbered. Draw what is in it before you do anything else in that room, and do not begin it on a dull day." Why? But he had already gone. The letter that broke it open came in the middle of November, and it was not from her grandmother. It was in a round, careful hand that Damaris had taught at a kitchen table 8 years earlier, to a child who had wanted to learn and had then been told by everybody else in the house that it did not signify. Sidonie had never written to her before. Sidonie had never had occasion to, because Sidonie had never been more than 2 rooms away. Damaris took it up to the north room and read it standing at the window. The county had settled on its version. That came first, 4 lines of it, delivered in the flat way of a girl repeating something she has heard often enough to know by heart, that the Sowerby girl had been sent north on an errand and had not come back. That Kalbeck had written a reply so short and so odd that Lady Adeline had read it twice at table and then not read it aloud after all. That there was a wager at the assembly rooms in Hexham on how long it would last. That a woman in Corbridge had said, and it had been repeated with delight, that his lordship kept things in jars, and had no doubt found a jar. Damaris read that part without any particular feeling. She had written the ending of that story herself on a Tuesday in October, and had been braced for it ever since. It was the second half that took the floor out from under her. "They cleared your room the same day," Sidonie wrote. "Grandmother had Kelly and the boy do it before the coach could have reached Hollodyke. Your bed is gone. The little chest that was our mother's is gone, and I do not know where, and I am afraid to ask. She has told everyone, and I mean everyone, that you have gone to our cousin in Ireland to be a companion, and she has told it so often that Araminta has begun to believe it, and yesterday Araminta said the word Ireland to me quite naturally, as though it were true. Damaris, they are not expecting you back. I do not think they ever were." And then, in a smaller hand, squeezed at the foot of the page where the girl had plainly gone on after deciding not to, there was this: "There is a paper in the escritoire. I have looked at it. I should not have. It is between grandmother and his lordship's man of business, and it is about you, and there is a sum in it. Damaris, is it true that you were sold?" She stood at the window for a long time. Everything she had built to survive the journey north had rested on one word, and the word was joke. A joke is a thing that ends. A joke requires an audience and a punchline, and a moment afterwards when everybody stops laughing and goes in to dinner. And she had gone up that track in the rain, telling herself that she had only to get through the moment and out the other side. She had not been the punchline, she had been stock. Her grandmother had not sent her north to be laughed at. She had sent her north to be got rid of, permanently, at a price, and the laughing had merely been thrown in because it cost nothing. And the crossed-out word, 4 lines, heavier pressure, a word struck through and written over, and he had said he could read what was underneath, and he had not told her. She found him in the second room with a tray of moths. "Did you pay her?" He set down the tray. "Sit down." "I do not want to sit down. There is a paper in my grandmother's desk with a sum in it, and my sister has read it. Did you pay her?" Caldbeck stood with his hands flat on the bench, and for the first time in the whole of her acquaintance with him, he looked to her like a man choosing between two bad things, rather than a man who simply did as he liked. "A sum was named," he said. "In the postscript, I have not paid it." "Not yet," said Damaris. He did not answer that at all, which was, she thought afterwards, the most honest thing he could possibly have done. Her father came on the 4th of December in weather that had no business carrying anybody anywhere, and he came alone. Damaris was in the 3rd room with the birds when she heard the horses, and she knew the sound of that particular carriage the way a person knows a cough in the next room. And she put down her pencil and looked at her hands for a moment, and then went out into the hall. Praed had him in the doorway and was not letting him past it. Sir Hollis Sowerby had aged. It had been 7 weeks. He had aged more than 7 weeks, and the effect was of a man wearing clothes cut for somebody slightly larger. He saw her, and his whole face did something complicated and unbearable, and he came forward with both hands out. "My dear girl," he said, "thank God. I have come to fetch you home." Damaris did not take the hands. Behind her, on the stair, she heard Caldbeck stop. He did not come down. He stood where he was 3 steps up, and she understood without turning round that he intended to remain there, unless she needed him, and that he would know the difference, and something in her chest went hot and unhelpful, and she pushed it away because she had work to do. "You are not going to fetch me home," she said to Damaris. "There is no home. Sidney has written to me. My bed is gone. My mother's chest is gone. You have all told the county I am in Ireland. A person cannot be fetched back to a place that has been tidied." Her father's hands came down. "Your grandmother," he said, "has behaved intolerably. I have said so. I have said so more than once." "To whom?" He did not answer. "That is what I thought," said Damaris. "You have said so to the fire in the evening when the room was empty, which is where you have said everything for the whole of my life." Something went out of him then, and something else came in to replace it, and she watched the change and knew exactly what was coming, because she had watched it in that man since she was 7 years old. "You have no notion of what you have done to this family," he said. "Araminta is not to be presented. Do you understand that?" Lady Ferrers withdrew the offer in a note of 2 lines. 2 lines, Damaris. "Your sister is 19 and she will not be presented, and she cries in the mornings, and Sidonie is not to go to the Rathmills for Christmas, and I cannot show my face at the sessions." "I did not do that," said Damaris. "Grandmother did that. She dictated it and I wrote it out, and I have the whole of it by heart, and if you would like me to recite the part about my face, I can do it now in this hall at whatever volume you prefer." Sir Hollis went a dull red. "Come home, and it can be mended. A season in the country, a great deal of nothing said, and by next year it is only a story. Stay here and you are a kept thing in a house of dead animals, and you will be that until you die." "I am employed here," said Damaris. "Employed. I am employed here at £80 a year. I have the keys to every case in this house. 6 weeks ago I found a bird bought for 900 guineas that had been made out of 3 birds by a man in Rotterdam, and I found it because I am the only person who ever looked at it properly. My name will go on the plates. Every plate. He has already had that put to the engraver in writing, which is more than any of you ever put in writing about me in 26 years. She heard her own voice ringing off the stone and did not stop it. You gave me nothing, not one thing. Not a shilling, not a defense, not so much as a sentence at a table. And a stranger gave me a pair of mitts and a key. So, no, I am not coming." The hall was very quiet. Then her father said, in a low voice, the thing he had come to say, and which he had probably rehearsed in the carriage. "You are not employed, Damaris. You have been bought. There is a paper. There is a figure in it. Do you imagine a man of that fortune advertises for a draftswoman by having one delivered to his door in the rain?" Praed moved. "Caldbeck, on the stair." did not. "And do you know why he wants it all put down on paper?" Sir Hollis said. Faster now, watching her face, hunting for the place where it would go in. A 9,000 things, drawn, and drawn quickly, and drawn by somebody who will not gossip about it in the village. Ask him about the lamps. Ask him why there are 20 lamps in one room, and why he holds a page against his nose. Ask him what he has got, and how long he has had it, and how long Fitzgibbon in Edinburgh gave him. Your grandmother has had a man asking questions in that city since October, and he has been thorough. He looked past her, up the stairs, and raised his voice. "You are collecting her, my lord. You will have her drawn and pressed and written up like the rest of it while you still can, and when you cannot, she will still be here, because you will have paid for her, and there will be nowhere for her to go." "Prayed," said Caldbeck from the stair. That was all he said. Say, Prade took Sir Hollis Sowerby by the elbow, not roughly, and had him through the door and down the steps and into the carriage in under a minute, with the practiced economy of a man who had done it before, and the door shut and the lock turned. Damaris stood in the middle of the hall. She had just refused her father in his own hearing, and she was not sorry, and she waited to be sorry, and it did not come. Whatever thread had run between them had been so thin for so long that cutting it made no sound at all, and that was the part she would think about later, in bed at 2 in the morning, not the cutting. What arrived instead was much worse, and it was arithmetic. 20 lamps, 8 inches from the page, beside, not above, a drawing given back without comment in a hand not quite steady. A black chest in the cellar to be drawn before anything else, and not on a dull day. She turned round to look at him. He had come down 2 steps. He was standing in the shadow between the landing and the hall, and she could not see his face properly, and she realized with a lurch that he could not see hers either, and had not been able to for some time. "Is any of it true?" she said. Caldbeck said, "Which part?" He told her half of it that night, standing in the hall, and the half he told her he told badly. "There is a thing wrong with the backs of my eyes," he said. "It began about 7 years ago. It takes the middle first. I can see you at the edges of me perfectly well, and I cannot see you when I look at you, which is an arrangement I have found almost funny on 2 occasions, and not funny on all the rest. Fitzgibbon in Edinburgh has seen it 4 times, and has stopped pretending he can do anything about it. He gives it 3 years, 4 if I am lucky, and sit very still, which I shall not. That is what your father meant." "Yes." "And the money," said Damaris. "I am not going to discuss the money tonight." "Then I am not going to discuss anything tonight, either." "Good," he said, and went upstairs, and did not appear in the gallery for 2 days. They worked around each other after that in a way that was worse than not working at all. He was short. She was exact. He came in and found fault with a caption, and she rewrote it without a word and left it on the bench, and he came back an hour later and stood looking at it for a long while and then went away again. Twice she heard him in the corridor at night, walking one hand along the wall, counting doors. She did not ask again about the money. She could not decide whether that was restraint or cowardice, and she suspected it was cowardice, and she was too tired to look at it directly, because the trouble with her father's version was that it fitted. That was the whole difficulty. It accounted for the lamps and the hurry and the £80 and the paper of a quality no sane employer buys for a stranger, and it accounted for a man who had looked at her hands and not at her face, and every time she took the thing apart to show herself the flaw in it, it went back together again perfectly well. On the 17th, she went down to the cellar for the black chest. It was a dull day. She noted that, and went anyway, and afterwards she thought about the fact that she had gone anyway. The cellar at Marrowdean was dry and vaulted, and had been fitted out like a ship, and the chest stood by itself against the north wall with no number chalked on it. Inside, under oiled cloth, was not what she had expected. There was no treasure in it. There were 40 or so specimens in homemade cases, and every case was labeled in the same hand, a young hand, cramped and enthusiastic, and every label gave a place and a date and the weather, which no dealer in the world has ever bothered to record. The dates ran from 19 years ago to 7. He had not bought these. He had gone out into fields and along ditches and up onto the fells and found them himself, one at a time, with his own eyes, and the last of them was dated 7 years ago, and after that there were none. Damaris sat down on an upturned crate with the lid open on her knees, and did not draw anything for some while. 9,000 items in that house, and he had told her to begin with the 40 he could not replace. Not on a dull day, he had said, and she had taken it at the time for the fussiness of a rich man about his light. It was not that. He had wanted them recorded, while there was still enough of him left to stand in the room and watch it being done, and he had not been able to say so, and so he had said something about the weather instead. She thought about that for a long time, and then she picked up her pencil because there was nothing else useful to be done with it. She was on the 9th of them when she heard him on the stair. He came down badly. She heard it before she saw it, the pause on each tread, the palm going flat against the wall, and she made herself keep her head down over the board because looking up would have been the worst thing she could possibly have done.
"Well,"
he said, "from the bottom step I have got as far as the ground beetles." He came across the floor. There was a lamp on a bracket to his left, and a second on the bench, and the light down there was poor and flat and gray, exactly the light he had told her not to begin in, and she understood at last that the instruction had never been about her. He reached for the corner of the bench and misjudged it by perhaps 4 inches, and his hand came down on the edge of the open case instead. It went off the bench. The case struck the stone floor, and the glass went, and the sound in that vaulted room was enormous, and the thing inside it, which had been carried home in a boy's pocket from a hillside 19 years ago, came apart into 4 pieces and a quantity of dust. Nobody moved. Then Caldbeck said, very quietly, "Get out." Damaris did not move. "Get out. Go upstairs. I do not want you in this room." "No," she said. "You do not tell me no in my own cellar. I do, in this one." He turned on her then, and it was ugly, and she stood and took it. He said that he did not require an audience. He said that she had been engaged to draw and not to watch, that he had not paid £80 a year for a nurse, that if she wanted something to feel sorry about, she might feel sorry about the state of the labels in room 4. He said other things. His voice went up and cracked in the middle of it, and that was the worst part. And she stood absolutely still with her hands at her sides, until he had finished, because she had learned a long time ago that the only way to survive that kind of noise is to be the one thing in the room that does not move. When he stopped, he was breathing hard and looking at a point about a foot to the left of her. Damaris said, "I am not sorry for you." He flinched. "I want to be clear about that, because you have decided that I am, and you are wrong. I have had people be sorry for me since I was 4 years old. It is the most corrosive substance in the world. Pa, it gets into the joints of a person, and it does not come out, and I would not do it to a dog, and I am certainly not going to do it to you." She crouched down. "I am going to tell you what is on the floor," she said, "because you cannot see it, and I can, and that is all this is." And she told him, "There are 4 pieces. The head and prothorax are together and undamaged. The left elytron is whole, and is lying about a foot from your boot with the inner face upward. The right elytron is broken across at about 1/3 of its length, and both parts are here. The abdomen is gone. That is dust, and I will not pretend otherwise. The label is intact, and it is face up, and it says weather fell the 9th of August, warm after rain." There was a silence. Then, in a voice that had nothing at all in it, Caldbeck said, "I remember the rain." "Sit down," said Damaris. He sat down on the bottom step. She swept the pieces up onto a card, with the flat of her palm, every one, and put the card on the bench and set a lamp beside it and not above it. Then she pulled off the gray wool mitts he had given her on the first evening, and knelt in front of him and put them into his hands, and closed his fingers over them the way he had closed hers over the keys. "Your hands are shaking, and I cannot use a shaking hand," she said. "That is my line. It was a good line." He laughed. It was not much of a laugh, but it came from somewhere real, and it went a long way to knocking the whole night sideways. She worked until 4 in the morning. She drew the beetle whole from the 4 pieces in the dust, with the head and prothorax measured true, and the broken elytron reconstructed from its mate, and she did it in color, which took the longest, and when she had finished she wrote the label out underneath in her own hand. Weather fell, the 9th of August, warm after rain. She left it on the bench and went up. He found it at 6. She heard him come in, and she heard him stop, and then she heard nothing for a very long time. He came to the door of the north room. He did not come in. He stood in the doorway with the sheet in his hand, held at his usual distance, tilted to the light. "You have lost a night," he said. "Yes. Why?" "Because in 3 years you will not be able to see the collection you built," said Damaris. "And I can. So there is not much sense in the two of us sitting about being proud, is there?" He crossed the room. He put the sheet down on the tilted table, and then he found her hand, not by looking at it, but by putting his own out into the space where he knew it would be, and he held it, and neither of them said anything at all for the space of about 8 breaths. Then Praed knocked and came in without waiting, which he had never once done, and said that there was a carriage on the Hollowdyke Road with the Sowerby arms on the panel, and that it was not 1 horse this time but 4. The Dowager Lady Adeline Sowerby came into the long gallery of Marrowdean a little after 8 on the morning of the 18th of December, having plainly lain the night at an inn, within an hour of the gates, without being announced, with Araminta on one side of her and Sidney on the other. And she was the only person Damaris had ever known who could make an entrance into a room containing a whale. She was small, that was the thing people forgot. She was small and upright, and dressed in black, and she came in the way a bailiff comes in, looking at the fabric of the place and pricing it. Sidney saw Damaris and made a small movement forward, and was stopped by a hand on her arm without her grandmother once turning her head. "Well," said Lady Adeline, "here you are, and here it all is." Caldbeck was at the far end. He did not get up. "You are in my house," he said. "I am in the house of a man who has had 9 weeks of the use of my granddaughter, and has not settled his account," said Lady Adeline. "And if that is impolite, it is a good deal less impolite than the alternative, which is a letter to the magistrate at Hexham describing what a gentleman of your fortune keeps in his cellars." "Grandmother," said Damaris, "do not speak. You were always at your best silent." She crossed to a case, looked into it with distaste, and turned round. £12,000, she said. "It was agreed. It is written down. I have brought the paper because I supposed his lordship would want to be reminded of it, gentlemen of that sort being famously forgetful about sums under 10,000, and I have brought 2 witnesses because I am not a fool." Araminta was looking at the floor. Sidney was looking at Damaris, and had gone the color of paper. Caldbeck stood up. Nothing was agreed. He said, "A figure was named to me. I have never signed anything, and I have never paid a shilling, and you know it." "You did not have to sign anything," said Lady Adeline. "She did." And she took a folded sheet out of her reticule and held it up. The gallery went quiet in the particular way rooms do when something is about to be very badly wrong. "It is entirely regular," said Lady Adeline. "My granddaughter is of age." She consented in writing on the 4th of October before witnesses to be settled upon his lordship as a member of his household, in consideration of the sum stated, and she signed it, and it is her hand, and there is not a soul in 3 counties who does not know her hand, because she has written every letter this family has sent for 6 years. Damaris walked the length of the gallery, and took the paper out of her grandmother's fingers, and her grandmother let her, because she had never once, in 26 years, imagined that Damaris might do anything at all. She read it. It was very good, better than she would have believed. The spacing was right, the slope was right, the long S in the third line was right down to the little hook she had picked up out of a book of engravings at 17 and never lost. Damaris looked at it for perhaps a quarter of a minute. Then she said, without any particular emphasis, "Bring me the lamp." Kolbeck brought the lamp. She laid the sheet flat on the top of the nearest case and took the lamp out of his hand and set it down at the very edge of the paper so that the light went across the page and not onto it, almost flat, the way he had made her hold it on the first evening. "Come and look," she said. "All of you. Grandmother, Araminta, come and look." Nobody moved except Sidney, who came at once. "This is a traced forgery," said Damaris. "I beg your pardon," said Lady Adeline. "It is traced, and it was traced badly, and I can show you 3 things, and any one of them would do. Look along the light. Do you see the line under the loop of the D? That is graphite. Somebody laid this sheet over an original and drew round the letters, and then went over it in ink and rubbed the pencil out afterwards, and you can rub graphite off paper, but you cannot rub it out of the paper, because the pencil bruises the fiber and the bruise takes the light differently, and it is still there and it will be there in 100 years. She moved the lamp an inch. That is 1. Here is 2. My hand is not even. It never has been. I have a callus on the middle joint of this finger, and it makes me drop pressure at the end of every long descender, so that a Y or a G of mine goes thin at the tail. Look at the tails. Every one of them is the same weight from top to bottom. That is not handwriting. Nobody writes like that. That is drawing. She straightened up, and that is 2. Would you like 3? Lady Adeline had not moved. Her face had not changed. But she had put one hand on the edge of the case. "I rule my margins," said Damaris. "I have ruled them at 7/8 of an inch since I was 19, on every page I have ever written for this family, and there are 400 of them in the escritoire in the morning room at Chalcombe, and any magistrate may send for them. This margin is 1 inch and 1/16, because whoever traced it laid my page down, crooked." The silence went on for some time. Then Damaris folded the paper along its own creases and looked at her grandmother, and found that she was not frightened, and the absence of it was so strange that it was almost like being ill. "Forgery of an instrument for the obtaining of money is a felony," she said. "You know that a great deal better than I do." Araminta made a sound. Damaris did not look at her. "I am not going to say who held the pen," she said. "I have thought about it for the last 2 minutes, and I am not going to. And if I am asked, I shall say that I do not know. But somebody put that sheet in front of somebody else and told them what to do with it, and stood over them while it was done. And that person is going to answer for it, because that person has never in her life done anything with her own 2 hands, and did not begin on the 4th of October. Lady Adeline Sowerby opened her mouth. "Prayed," said Kolbeck. "My lord, ride to Hexham. Take the paper. Take Miss Sowerby's written account, which she will give you in a quarter of an hour, and take 4 pages of her correspondence out of my own desk for comparison. And send Mrs. Kellow up to the west stair with a fire, because the younger Miss Sowerby is stopping." "I am not," said Sidney, in a whisper. "You are," said Damaris. They took her grandmother out to the carriage. At the door she stopped and half-turned, and Damaris understood that she was waiting to be spoken to, and had been waiting 9 weeks, and that this was the last of it. Damaris did not speak. It was, she found afterwards, the only piece of the whole business she never once regretted. Then the door shut, and the bolt went across, and the gallery was empty, except for 2 people, a great deal of glass, and a whale. Damaris put both hands flat on the case in front of her. £12,000, she said. "I never paid it. You had a paper drawn up." "I did. Show me." Kolbeck went to the desk at the far end and came back and put it in her hands, and it was exactly what she had known it would be, and at the bottom of it there was no signature. I had it drawn on the 8th of November, he said. I read it, and I could not decide what I would be buying, and I did not trust the answer I was giving myself, so I put it in a drawer. I have taken it out 4 times. It is still not signed. I did not tell you, because there is no version of the sentence I want a fortnight to decide whether you were a person that improves in the saying. Damaris put it down. Say the other thing, she said. Say the thing my father said. You wanted somebody who would not gossip, and you wanted her quickly, and you have 3 years and 9,000 items, and you found a woman nobody in England would ever ask a question about, and you cannot see my face. That is the part that makes it all work, is it not? You are the one man in the country who was never going to mind because there was nothing there for you to mind. Caldbeck stood very still. Is that what you think I saw? I think you saw a pair of hands. No, he said. I saw the hands second. He came round the case. You came into this room and said your name, and I turned my head about 4 degrees, which is what I do, because that is where I have any sight left. And you had not looked at me at all. Every person who has come through that door in 9 years has looked at me first to see what I am, and then at the glass to see what it is worth. You looked up. You stood in a doorway soaked to the skin in front of a stranger who had every power over you, and you tipped your head back and looked at the ribs, and your mouth was moving. Damaris said nothing. You were counting them, he said. I did not see a face. I have not properly seen a face in 4 years. I saw somebody looking at a thing to find out what it was, which is the only occupation I have ever cared about in my life, and which I am losing, and which I had never once, in 41 years, seen another person do without being asked. He stopped. That is what I saw, he said. There is not a word of it that is kind, and I have been trying to find one for 9 weeks. Damaris walked away from him down the gallery, to the 3rd case from the inn, where a portfolio tied with tape had stood against the leg since the middle of October because nobody had ever moved it. She picked it up and brought it back and put it on the case and pulled the tape. 9 years, she said. Look at all of it. He looked at all of it. It took him nearly an hour, at 8 inches, tilted to the lamp. Ditches, hedgerows, a dead hare, 140 studies of feathers, frost on a window in 11 states. A heron. There was not one human face in the whole of it. There was not so much as an ear. Until the last sheet, which was newer than the rest, and which was not finished, and which was a man at 8 inches from a page with his head turned 4 degrees to the left. Caldbeck was a long time over that one. Then he said, I am going to ask you something, and I am going to ask it badly, because it is the 2nd offer I have made in 9 years, and both of them have been to you. He did not kneel. Neither of them had any use for it. Marry me, he said, not for protection, though you will have it, you will need it, because your name is going to be in a court at Hexham inside the month, not for the money. Marry me because the plates of this collection are going to carry your name, and I want the world to have to say the whole of it. And because in 3 years I will not be able to see any of this, and I would rather lose it to you than to anybody, and because I have got about 1,000 things left that I want looked at properly. And what I get, said Damaris. Everything I own, said Caldbeck, which is a great deal and is not the answer. The answer is that nobody in this house is ever going to describe you again. You will do the describing. That is the post, and it is yours, and I am afraid it is permanent. They were married in the last week of February, in the chapel at the edge of the estate, which held 40 people and contained 9. Damaris did not wear white. She had thought about it for one evening and then gone to the dressmaker in Hexham with a swatch of watercolor paper on which she had mixed a color herself over the course of 2 hours, from madder and a little burnt umber and the smallest possible quantity of black, and she had put it on the counter and said, "That one." And the woman had looked at the swatch and then at her face and had understood and had been too professional to say a word about it. It was the exact color of the mark. She wore it from throat to hem. Praed gave her away, having asked for the privilege in a single sentence and then having refused to discuss it. Mrs. Kello held the ring. Sedany stood at the front in a new coat, and cried steadily from the beginning to the end of the service, and afterwards ate rather a lot of cake, and was not scolded for it by anybody, which was, she said, the strangest part of the whole day. When it was done, Caldbeck turned and put his hands on either side of her face, which meant he could not see any of it at all, and kissed her in front of the 9 of them for a length of time that Praed later described as unbecoming and did not appear to regret. The news reached London before the end of the month, and it did not go the way the county had prepared for. There was no scandal to be had. That was the difficulty. The gossip had been built for a kept woman in a cellar, and what arrived instead was a marchioness, and a marchioness cannot be whispered about in the same tense as a governess. Then, in the autumn, the first volume of the Marrodine plates came out of the press in Edinburgh, 47 of them, engraved from the originals, and under every single one, in letters the same size as the Latin, was the name Damaris, Marchioness of Caldbeck. 2 learned societies wrote to her. One of them wrote to her husband instead by mistake, and he sent it back unopened, with the direction corrected in his own hand. Her grandmother was tried at the assizes in the spring. Damaris gave her evidence in a clear voice for 1 hour and 40 minutes, and was not once shaken, and she was not asked who had held the pen, because Caldbeck had spoken to counsel beforehand, and the question was never put. Lady Adeline Sowerby was convicted. The sentence was commuted, as such sentences generally were for women of her age and rank, and she sailed in the August, and she wrote twice from the colony, and both letters were burned unopened by Praed, who had not been instructed to do it and was not asked about it afterwards. Walk. Chalcombe was sold to meet the debts. Sir Hollis took a small house in Alnwick and was seen at no sessions. Araminta married, without a season and without a settlement, a curate in Durham who was reportedly kind to her, and in time she and Damaris exchanged letters at Christmas, which was neither warm nor cold and was as much as either of them could manage. Sidney did not go back. Sidney stayed and learned to mix a passable green, and was eventually rather good at wings. 2 winters after that he could not read at all. It went as Fitzgibbon had said it would, from the middle outward. And there came a morning in April when he sat down with a page and turned it about in the light for some time, and then set it down and said, "Well," and that was the whole of the announcement. Damaris found him in the long gallery an hour later, standing under the ribs with his hands in his pockets. She came and stood beside him and did not say anything about it, because there was nothing to say about it that he had not already thought at 4 in the morning. Instead, she said, "The frost has gone off the north windows and there is a great deal of light in here today, and the 3rd case from the end is open because I am working in it, and there is a robin on the outside sill who has been there since 8 and is entirely unafraid of me, which I resent." "Go on," said Caldbeck. So she went on. She had got very good at it by then. It had begun in a cellar in December with 4 pieces and a quantity of dust, and it had turned without either of them deciding on it, into the ordinary shape of their days. She described what was in front of them, in the flat, exact language of a person putting down what is there rather than what is expected, and he listened, and sometimes he corrected her, because his memory of that room was 19 years deep, and hers was 2. When she had finished, he said, "How many ribs?" Damaris looked up at them. 15 on the left, she said, and 15 on the right, and one of them on the left has been repaired with a brass sleeve about 1/3 of the way along, and whoever did it badly. "I know," said Caldbeck. "I did it. I was 22, and I was in a hurry." He put his hand out into the space beside him, without looking, because he knew exactly where she would be, and she took it. Once, a long time ago, a woman had stood in a doorway in a wet cloak, with her hood pushed back, in front of the only man in England who had every reason to send her away, and had waited to be looked at. He had never once looked at her face. He had looked at her hands, and then he had given her a key, and it had turned out that this was the whole of it. Did Damaris and her Marquess get exactly the ending they deserved? There is nothing quite like watching a woman who was told her whole life that she was something to be hidden turn out to be the only person in the room who could actually see. If this story was worth your evening, a like genuinely helps more people find it, and I would be grateful if you passed it along to somebody who needs reminding that being underestimated is not the same thing as being small. Hit subscribe and turn on notifications for the next full-length romance, and tell me down in the comments which moment you would have paid money to watch Lady Adeline's face during.